story makers, and welcome to Tellwell the Podcast, where we're inviting you into the conversations that we get to have with some of our favorite leaders, nonprofit leaders, business leaders, all those types of folks. Today, we have a special conversation with somebody who's near and dear to our hearts. But speaking of those that are near and dear to my heart, Duncan Williamson, one of my favorite storytellers and co-hosts. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. This is a very exciting time to be in the podcast studio with you.
It is an exciting time. And I have to curb my excitement a little bit because I realize like the advice that you're going to get over the next 25, 30 minutes is pretty incredible and pretty insightful. But it's actually with our own chief of staff, Annie Wood.
Yeah, Annie is such a fantastic member of our team. She's been, I think she's coming up on 8 months, 9 months, close to a year, maybe in July.
A year in August.
Yeah. And so what's fun too, though, is she had a little stint at Tellwell several years ago, long before I was even here. And so she's been just such a fantastic add to our team. And she brings such a very different background and set of experiences than either you or I have. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's been the most fun for me to get to just learn so much from her and get to ask questions and see her start to take over facilitation of learning and other stuff learning and development initiatives has been neat for me to see just because it's so different than what you and I kind of the brain space we think in.
Well, I think one of the things that maybe you and I don't like to admit to is our ability to follow through may not be as strong because as you think about that integrator visionary relationship, if you're talking EOS, we're both visionaries, right? We have big ideas. We have big things that we want to accomplish. And sometimes we forget to do all of the little steps that have to go along the way. And then we also get frustrated by all those little steps. And that's something that Annie is really, really brilliant at. So as we were kind of figuring out, Annie was like, people have to hear from us. And so we had kind of a state of the story last November. I don't know if you remember this. It must have really impacted you, which I'm glad to hear. But one of the things that we announced there was our year of curiosity. And so I would be curious, as we are 6 months into our year of curiosity, what has the year of curiosity meant for both you and your team?
Yeah, I think the year of curiosity has shown up in a bunch of different ways, honestly. I think one of those ways is new and different things that our team is doing. So getting beyond the obvious sort of impact film, broadcast commercial, those deliverables, the actual creative work that's going out the door is something that's been, we've maintained the level of quality and all the stuff we need to on that front, but we've gotten to play around in a little more photography, doing podcasts, doing other sort of forms of that creative work has been neat. I think one of the cool things that we also continue to get to do and we continue to encourage, and this is another one of those things that Annie has helped to encourage and make sure there's time for, is the ongoing education stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's everything from our lead editor basically doing a cool seminar on how to best do track editing in Premiere.
Ooh, sexy.
Yeah, super sexy stuff. But for the group of us who are in there is super cool, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then having times to do our adventure, we called it, where we got to take some time and get to think about the work we do, how we do the work we do, how we work as a team, and be curious, like you mentioned, about ways we can do it better. And I think that's one of the pieces of curiosity that there's obviously that curiosity of story or research. I love history and I'm always curious. I hear some story, I want to go look up the article about it, or being curious about a story is one thing. But I think being curious about how we can be better, how we can be better creatives, how we can be better leaders, being curious about what you don't know is another thing that's been at least top of my mind for the last 6 months.
I love that. I think as I think about that year of curiosity, I've been really impressed by how everybody has embraced it, not just on our team, but also how we've started to translate that to our story makers and to our clients. And I think one of the most interesting ones, kind of direct connection to our year of curiosity, has been how we talk about our story makers and our storytellers and our craft, which we'll get into a little bit on this episode. But just to give a little bit of a primer, can you kind of go through our storytellers, our story makers, and our craft story?
And so we have a fun little image that we created that's a fire with 3 logs. If you've like built a campfire, you might do the log cabin approach, or you might do the teepee approach, where it's the 3 standing up and they're touching at the top. So those 3 things are like the core of what we do, right? Those 3 things together make up what Tellwell is. The craft, to start with, kind of the most tactical one, that's the work we do, right? That's the beautiful magazine that we put out for a client. That's the brand that we come up with. That's the website that goes live, or the video that goes out at the event. So that's the craft, right? The stuff we're actually doing. The storytellers are the ones that are like making that craft, right? They're the ones.
Those are our teammates.
Exactly.
Right?
They're the ones that tell the story. And in that sense, we are the hands behind the computer, right? We're out on shoots, we're doing those things. So that's our team, right? And that's not just like the creatives of the team. And I think that's a really important thing to point out too, is like, we have a fantastic team of project managers that make sure our work happens when it's supposed to, and we have the right tools and resources and everything for our work. We've got a great staff of people that keep the business operating the way that it needs to, so that we can all do those things. So that's really the tellers part, right? And then our story makers, and they are the ones who are our clients, right? And so story makers, and the reason for that is like, when we're making stories, when we're sharing stories, I think especially in like, story is starting to become this pretty big buzzword. You have storytelling is a phrase people throw around as like, I'm a storytelling agency. We're a storytelling company. We focus on storytelling. And it's this thing that everybody likes to talk about. And what I think a lot of people like to talk about and then do is they like to do their version of the story, right? I'm the expert here. I'm shooting the video, or I'm editing the video, or our team is producing this commercial. We know how to tell the story. We're going to tell you what the story is, and then we're going to make it our way. And that's what goes out the door. At Tellwell, we have a very different approach, obviously. Number one, when you think of like the more specific stuff and the way that we work with, whether it be print or written stories or like video stories, we're hearing from the people themselves rather than doing a lot of scripted work. And
they're all interview based.
Exactly. It's
even
real
written stories.
Yeah. And whether it shows up in a magazine or an article, even on the content on the website, we interview people for it. It's real people, real words, that stuff. I like to say like real people, real stories is kind of like a reminder of what we do. And so for story makers, they are the story makers. They're the ones that are sharing their stories. They're the ones that are supporting us with their clients and having their clients share their stories. They're the ones in front of the camera, and also the ones that are helping to craft what the purpose of this whole project is. And I think that's a little bit of a different approach that we take in the way that we go alongside of them rather than try to come in as the experts in the room.
That's one of my favorite tactical things that has come out of our year of curiosity, because we want to make sure that we are using like inclusive language. And some of our previous language was not as inclusive, not purposefully exclusive, but definitely had some room for improvement. So Annie is going to talk a lot about like culture. She's going to talk about framework. She's going to talk about how a little bit of structure actually makes us more creative. So without further ado, let's hear from Tellwell Chief of Staff, Annie Wood. Welcome to Tellwell the Podcast, where we get to have conversations with some of our favorite folks, understanding what they do, how they do it. And these are the conversations that we get to have on a daily basis, but we want to invite you into them. And so, as you know, this podcast is intended for nonprofit leaders, small business leaders, really anybody that is trying to build a brand or a cause. And today with me on the podcast, I'm so excited to have Annie Wood.
Hi, Max.
Hi, Annie. How are you?
I'm so good. It's lovely to see you across the way.
It's so good to see you across the table. And I think one of the most fun things right now is like Annie and I have been in the throes of running a small business together.
Yeah, for the last year and some change.
So Annie Wood, I know everybody knows you, everybody knows your story, but for those of you who don't, for those 8 people that may not know, who is Annie and how the heck did Annie get to Tellwell? Back to Tellwell. A little boomerang action from a few years ago. I would say, long story short, Annie is a culmination of all of my lived experiences
the times in which I don't know what I'm doing and I've had to learn along the way, the times in which I've felt like I got this and I'm leading other people or leading a process or a project. I think too, the stumbling blocks, the building blocks that have come from education, that have come from nonprofit world, that have come from simply trying to live life and make some weird things happen. And those are positive, good, weird things like, hosting a fake art show or creating a summer camp or...
Her TED Talk is on the power of being weird. So it's a very positive thing.
Yes, for me, positive thing. It's all about showing up as yourself and welcoming others to do the same, which I know that I have a space to do because I have people like Max in my life. We're going to open up with welcoming arms, say, come on in, weirdos.
That's exactly right. And so how did you get back to Tellwell?
Yeah. So the long and the short of it is, went to college with no plan and no idea what I wanted to major in. Made my way through college, figured out that I kind of liked learning, ended up working in a higher ed space, running student activities for a long time. Did a little side trip into some nonprofit world where I actually met Max when he was beginning Tellwell, running a co-working space where Tellwell did Tellwell Tuesdays for a hot minute there. And then after I had spent a number of years back in higher ed, and Max and I had stayed connected through podcast club, through happy hours, through phone calls to say, I'm dealing with this thing and I need a friend. I need someone who I can talk this through with. You reached out and said, hey, we're doing a new little thing at Tellwell called the Chief of Staff. And I don't know if you're interested, but if you are interested, we should talk about it. And so that's really how I made my way back to Tellwell, was you really talking about where you see Tellwell going in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and really thinking about the ways in which you are working so in tandem with the creative teams to tell the stories of brands and causes. And that's something that's near and dear to my heart, is work that matters. I spent a lot of years in education getting to work with students. And so this transition into leading some of our learning and development, into coaching some of our teammates, into how can they master their craft, and then also the opportunity to connect with our clients, connect with those brands and those causes to help them figure out what are we doing, how do we tell the story of it, is really what attracted me back to Tellwell. And also Max's funny jokes, just a hop, skip, and a jump away.
There aren't really funny jokes. It's just mostly inappropriate comments that get pivoted into jokes. It's great. But okay, I'm gonna throw in a bit of a flag here. I don't know what kind of flag it would be. Just a pause for a moment, because I remember the conversation about you coming back just a little bit differently. And
okay.
I think that it is also a little bit reflective of how you and I have stayed in touch over the years. As Annie and I have stayed connected over the last 5 years, one of the things that has happened naturally is when I would be having a really rough day, week, month at Tellwell, whether that be with people or clients or whatever it was, somehow Annie was always there to share some ideas, share some thoughts, share some challenges. And somehow it magically also happened that as you had challenging days, weeks, months in your roles, then I would be able to provide, oftentimes it was mostly just a mirror to say hey, you reminded me of this. What if I remind you of that? And when I was developing the Chief of Staff role, I actually didn't think that you would ever be interested in that and coming back into that private sector again. So I actually, weirdly enough, created the position after you. Right? It was what are my favorite things? Who have been the most influential people, both at Tellwell in the past, as well as the people that I value those conversations with the most. And you were somebody that kept coming up as a problem solver. They take care of people. They open up new experiences. They can get shit done. Right? It really, a lot of those core norms that we live by on a regular basis, Annie does live those fully. So at that happy hour, and maybe the reason why this doesn't resonate as much is because you were having a pretty challenging time, and one of our common rules is you never quit on a good day.
On a bad day.
You never quit on a bad day. And one of the things that I think was happening was like as there were like kind of challenges and piles of challenges and lots of red tape in the type of space that you were in, like it started to be a conglomeration of those not great days. And as you shared that, it was really hard for me to not be like, by the way, you should just apply for this. Because I remember I had it like printed out and I really wanted to show it to you because I was like, if anybody's going to have feedback on it, it's going to be Annie. And if anybody has like connections to somebody that will be perfect for this position, it will be Annie. And so I handed it to you and I was like, can you just provide feedback on it? And like secretly I was really hoping like, I just wish you'd apply for it. And then it was Sunday.
I remember getting your text. Yeah.
Because it was like a Sunday morning and it was like, dear Stanny, I really think that you should probably apply for this and maybe think about becoming our chief of staff. And the serendipity of that was, I think you had texted back probably within 10, 15 minutes.
That's my go-to. Yep.
Funny you should mention that. Like I was just like, I had the job description in hand and I was journaling about it.
Yeah, I remember it. I was like sitting in my sunroom, like job description on the table, journal in my hand, cup of tea on the side table, and being like, wow, this is the type of thing that gets me really excited, is investing in people, finding ways to help them find more success. And I think I had for so long thought that education and nonprofit work was the avenue to that. And I think it takes a special place to make that really possible in the private sector, in, a business setting, right? But I think it's the care that I saw about people and the parts of the role that are really so focused on helping the team learn and grow and do great work together that I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah. And I think like one of the props that maybe I haven't given to you yet, but I really should, is when one of the pieces of feedback, kind of recurring pieces of feedback that we shared kind of in those happy hours was like if you didn't communicate it, it didn't happen. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I was like, I should really text her and be like, hey, I think you should actually apply for this rather than just like, let go and let God. I was like, you know what, let's make the intention known. And so what a fun year and a half it's been so far.
I know. Yeah. It's hard to believe that it's only been that in the best way.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. It's hard to imagine. There are a few like Tellwellians that it's hard to imagine a time before them, and you're one of them. And I think part of it is because I blacked it out a little bit because much of my life was in chaos before having a person that could focus on the people, right? Because my job was really to do all of the above. And when you try to do everything, you do nothing very well.
And that is true in most things in life. And so it's about, finding what are the things that give you the most energy and how do you find people to fill the parts around it.
Amen. So for the purposes of today's conversation, what I'd really love to talk a little bit about is your learning and development journey into, I'm going to say kind of back into the private sector. And one of the platforms, one of the folks that I follow a lot is Donald Miller and StoryBrand and his research of the hero's journey based on, Joseph Campbell popularizing it in the 60s and how he's really turned that into kind of a whole business platform. And so selfishly, I was like, Annie, do you want to become a Business Made Simple certified coach? Because I need somebody to like love this stuff as much as I do. And so I don't just totally look like a crazy person when I'm like, all right, you guys, we're going to do a sales script now. So I guess to start with, can you just kind of introduce Business Made Simple and then what it is to be a Business Made Simple certified coach?
Yeah. So as Max mentioned, Donald Miller and his team have really crafted this Business Made Simple framework really to help people think about how to break down the elements of business into things that don't seem so overwhelming and so complex. Kind of fun. They use the analogy of an airplane. So the 6 different parts of the business that you need to be thinking about and working on all correlate to part of the plane. The cockpit is leadership, makes sense, right? All those different types of things. And so it really helps people who are trying to think about where do I want my business to go? So thinking about how do I set the vision? And that's really part of the leadership part. There's some great frameworks and great tools to help people start to identify that and start to articulate that, because a lot of times especially, maybe Max, you as a founder know, you might have ideas and visions, but it's harder to get people always to see those or to buy into those or to say, what does that look like in action? We might have this great vision, but what does it look like? And so I think that's part of the Business Made Simple that I get really excited about helping people work with. And then, of course, the marketing and communications pieces and the pieces around products or around services that help people think about how do we describe what we do? What problems are we solving? What are the ways that we can connect with the right people? And by right people, I mean the folks whose problems we're solving. And so the Business Made Simple has a variety of frameworks that we can implement kind of depending on what a client is really looking to work on. And that's what I like is because it's not you have to go through all 6 pieces for all of it to make sense. You can kind of pick and choose to say, hey, we know that our operations are in a spot where we feel good about them, but what we really want is to think about the vision for the next 10 years. Or we know that we have this great new product we're launching, but we really need to think about how do we find the people to connect with who's going to benefit. And so I love the fact that it is really an opportunity to choose the parts that make sense at the time, but that they still all really function together.
I love that. And I think the thing that gets me really excited is at Tellwell, we have a process called road mapping. And that roadmap is really intended to be like a marketing plan, a communications plan. And then we try to like build those things around an ecosystem. And the thing that I'm most excited about, and I'd love for you to talk about a little bit, is kind of how do we like pick and choose which of those we might do with a client?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's part of my role as a coach is doing a little bit of an onboarding and hearing what are the types of challenges that an organization is having and where are they trying to get to. And so sometimes if they have trouble articulating that, I say, let's start with the business on a mission portion so we can help you clarify and get on the same page around that. But sometimes they have a great idea of, we're trying to do X in the next 5 years. And I can say, okay, let's talk about your internal communications to help your team stay on track with that. What do you need to do revenue-wise in order to help propel you there? And so that's how asking some of those questions early on really helps us understand where are they at so that we can meet a client where they are instead of where we think they are, where we want them to be. And so that's really, for me, part of that as a coach is being able to ask some of those questions to really understand which tools are going to be right for them. So bringing those into road mapping, a lot of times is a fun opportunity for me to get to tag team and facilitate that road mapping with you, Max, because we can bring in those frameworks that are often really usable and very user-friendly. They named it Business Made Simple for a reason because they don't believe that people should need an MBA or a PhD in order to be able to run a business. And so many of those principles, if we uncomplicate them and we simplify them, we can help communicate them internally. We can help clarify for ourselves. And then also, especially when it comes to the messaging, I think that's where the magic of the hero's journey combined with some of the frameworks around communication made simple and marketing made simple really help translate the hero's journey, which is helping people really get clear on what do we do, who do we serve, and why does it matter? And then translating that into, well, if I need to tell, my potential customers about this through a video, how can I apply this idea? And really takes it and makes them actionable. I think that's my favorite thing about the Business Made Simple frameworks is it's not just like a theoretical exercise. At the end of it, you get a very usable thing, whether that is a sales script that says, hey, I can clearly articulate the problem that we can solve. I can help figure out who this message is going to resonate with, and then be able to find where do we get that message out there, I think is where the rest of the road mapping for us really comes in. I think that's some of Tellwell's special sauce is that we can say, okay, we've gotten really clear on your message. Now let us help you strategize. Where are we going to put this message so that it gets to the right people?
Yeah. I do have one big issue with Business Made Simple.
Yeah.
And that's the name of it. Because I think what it does a little bit is that it feels like exclusionary. And I realize like they're doing it because like the lion's share of the types of folks who are going to use this are small business owners and they can probably benefit from the most. But as we've used it with nonprofits and causes and even like universities, it has been fascinating and just so inspiring to see how quickly when you adopt some of these frameworks that Annie teaches you, it really does change like the marketing ecosystem and the communications ecosystem for a team or for the marketing side of a university or a cause. So do you want to talk a little bit about how we also can apply these frameworks to like causes.
Well, yeah, that's what's cool. It's, even though it's called Business Made Simple, every organization has to operate. And so that's where I think a lot of the individual pieces of Business Made Simple's airplane model really can be applied to causes, can be applied to nonprofits, can be applied to universities and educational organizations. Because every organization has leadership, right? Every organization has maybe services they offer or something they do in the world. And so even if you don't have a product that you're selling, right, you might have a service you're offering. You might have donors you need to connect with. You might have potential students you're trying to reach. And so that idea of marketing and messaging is really about finding the right message and then finding the strategies that can connect you to them. And so for me, I've seen so much success in working with brands and causes, both because at the end of the day, they're different, but they're not that different, right? Because at the end of the day, we all have something that we want to share with the world, and just what that thing is looks a little different for every type of organization.
So my very favorite thing has been, there have been probably 2 or 3 instances now over the course of the last 5 or so years that we've been using like the hero's journey framework and a little bit of the story brand framework, and then more recently the Business Made Simple frameworks. But one of my very favorite things is when we're working with a small business or even a big business, this happened to as well, that will say, that will go through the workshop with us, and then they say, we've been doing this for 20 years and you did in an hour and a half. Like, you're able to like clearly articulate our message, clearly articulate our why, clearly articulate what our offering is. You were able to do more of that in like the 2 to 3 hours that we've been together than we've been able to do in the last 20 years.
100%. And it's so fun. And I think part of it is that idea of really distilling a message down and getting it to be really clear and more concise, because too often we want to talk about every single aspect of it, and helping people zoom out to that 30,000 foot level to say, what is I like to call it the welcome mat, right? We need to roll up the welcome mat. That is, a welcome mat doesn't have a paragraph on it. A welcome mat says welcome, and it helps you know you should go in the house. And in the house is where you see all the other things, you get to explore all that, but you have to get people in the door first. And that's where some of those messages around, what is our organization? Who do we serve? What problems can we help solve? Why does our work matter? That's what the welcome mat is. And then you get to invite them in.
That's a brilliant analogy. I've never heard this analogy before.
I used it at our recent road mapping.
Did you? I must have blacked out during that moment, but oh my goodness. Like, that is, I feel like that should be a whole blog post by itself. So
great. I'll write one.
Taken care of. Check and check. Okay. This has felt like, I'm going to say this has felt borderline salesy, and it's not. I want to be like very blunt about like, this is not intended to like sell people on the road mapping process by any stretch of imagination. As much as anything, just wanted to like educate on like, we have one of like 2, I think, Business Made Simple certified coaches in the entire state of North Dakota.
Yep.
Is that accurate?
Accurate.
And so like, these are really cool frameworks. And what I can tell you and share very safely and say very confidently, they are helping us to grow our business.
100%.
Right? Like in year 1, which I mean, we're coming up on 10 years, we've had more traction and growth in the last like 2 to 3 years since we started using the story brand framework, the hero's journey, and then more recently, the Business Made Simple, than like the first 7 or 8. And that feels wild, but they're simple frameworks, and like they're what are helping Tellwell to grow. But I think more importantly, like they're helping our leadership team to get really clear in how we communicate our goals, our product offerings, how we want to do business and who we want to work with our clients and with our team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's what's cool, is that so often people think about marketing as just external messages, but they forget about the opportunity to have communication internally as well. And so for me, that's been really fun to work with some clients on, is to help them think about, what does your team need to know? Why do you want them to be excited about this new feature that you're launching in an app? Or why do you want people to be excited about this new service that you're offering? And really helping them think about, how do I get buy-in from our team, and so that they feel educated? Because too often people don't have enough information to know how they should feel, so they just check out, or they just like, well, if it's important, they'll tell me. And that's what people are waiting for oftentimes, especially in internal marketing messaging, is the idea that I don't know what I don't know, and I don't even know enough to ask the right questions. And so I need someone to give me to roll out the welcome mat.
One thing we love to talk about is if it wasn't communicated, it didn't happen. And I think this is the communication made simple framework specifically is one of them that I think does a beautiful job of making sure that things not only get communicated, but get communicated like clearly and effectively.
Yeah, we muddy the message because we're trying to over-explain, or if we aren't really clear on it ourselves, then sometimes we're talking around it, we're talking through it. And I think that's where, those comments that we get from organizations that say, you helped us write our brand story in 3 hours in a way we've never been able to articulate. And I think part of it is really saying, what are the right questions to ask? What's the right information to capture so that we can clear away the muddiness, clear away the muck, wipe our boots off on the welcome mat, if you will. I'm really leaning into this analogy now that she gave me feedback on it.
Give you positive feedback, and now the welcome mat is out. Maybe that's what we should send our clients, like tiny little welcome mats.
Oh, cute.
Oh, that'd be adorable. Anyway. Okay, real quick, let's do a couple of rapid fire questions. I'm curious, Annie, of the content that you're consuming right now, what is your favorite content?
Ooh, okay. So admittedly, I like two really divergent paths in my world, right? Where I consume young adult fiction because that's like brain candy to put me to bed at night. So there's a series about the Hawthorne brothers it is about this billionaire who disinherits all of his grandsons and picks this seemingly random girl to inherit all the money, and they have to figure out why. And then there's a whole series built around it. So that one has been fun because it's just pure entertainment. Otherwise, in other parts of my life where I'm let's learn some things. I really have been appreciating Cy Wakeman's reality-based leadership.
Ooh,
I think that
so
was
good.
So good, very applicable. And then also her really breaking down the barriers to things don't have to be overly complicated. And maybe that's a theme here with Business Made Simple and this, but we often overcomplicate things. We overexert our brains trying to make sense of something. And she really helps strip away a lot of that and says, what are the facts in this situation? What's the recommendation of how to solve the problem? What do we know to be true? And so I've really liked that because she does a lot of good bite-sized pieces of information that help me reflect or help me think. And I think she does a really good job of presenting information and then encouraging you on how you could apply it or encouraging how to think about it. Something else I've been going back to recently is Peter Block. He's he's an author, and he's one of those where he's got a few books that I revisit every few years. And so I actually just pulled The Answer to How is Yes, one of my favorite books of his, back out of my bookshelf to reread a couple of sections. Because as we're trying to figure out, what does the next 10 years of Tellwell look like? Or what are we going to try and do as we improve this or that? Kind of just reminding myself of the answer to how is yes, which means when we commit to, a goal, that is the yes we need to then figure out, well, how much time will this take? How much are we willing to invest in it? Who are the people we need to bring in? So that's been a fun one to revisit a bit.
Wow. In the Cy Wakeman one, are you listening to the podcast or are you doing the book or both?
I've been listening to the podcast.
Okay. Awesome. She has an incredible podcast that she does with Alex Dorr, and it is such a great listen. There's one that I love in particular about toxic geniuses. And I love her perspective on it, that you cannot be a genius and be toxic at the same time, because if you were truly a genius, you'd be able to process through that you're making everybody else around you miserable.
100%. I love that episode.
I love that episode. We'll leave a link in the show notes. Anyway, even though shorter episode, we still managed to talk for almost a half hour on the beauty of Business Made Simple, a little bit about the content you're consuming. Anything else you want to leave folks with as they go out and start their communications marketing ecosystem journeys?
Ooh, what a journey to be on. I think at the end of the day, what I hope people think about is clear and concise may seem like it's too simple, but at the end of the day, people can understand and can digest. And when you can get them interested, they want to learn more. That's when you start to give them more depth and more details. But if you overwhelm them on the front end, they're going to write you off. And so thinking about how to be simple is really about an invitation that says you're invited. And then you open it up for more details.
Love that. I think Mama Brene says, clarity is kind. And I couldn't agree more. So, hey, thanks, Annie, for being on the podcast. We're going to have you back. We're going to talk more about leadership. We're going to talk more about content. We're going to talk more about how you and I are thinking about strategic planning over the next 10 years. And we just have a whole lot more to chat about and share.
I think what we're learning is we should just record every conversation we have.
That sounds really dangerous.
Actually,
but
yes.
Also a heck of a lot of fun. We should actually just like take the microphones down with us to Wild Terra as we go to happy hour, because that's where we're headed to next. So we will see you in about 5 minutes. But anyway, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Tellwell the Podcast. A review goes a really long way, so please give us 5 stars on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. On behalf of my co-host, Max Kringen, and I, thank you so much for listening, and please continue to share your story.